In the oldest Norse poems, there is a phrase that appears again and again. The Aesir and the Elves, not the gods and the giants, not the gods and the dead. The gods and the elves, spoken together as if the two belong in the same sentence in a way that nothing else quite does. They feast together. They sit in council together. Odin himself, in one of his catalogues of power, mentions a spell that lets him tell them apart, which tells you something. Without the spell, apparently, you might not be able to. These beings are woven through the oldest sources with a closeness that the sources never quite explain. And their realm, Alfheim, is mentioned exactly twice. What the sources say about Alfheim. Alfheim, home of the elves. Grimnismal, one of the oldest mythological poems in the Poetic Edda, names it in a single stanza. Odin is speaking disguised, tortured, reciting the homes of the gods to a young man who does not know who is listening. He lists Alfheim alongside the halls of the other gods and says this: "The gods gave Alfheim to Freyr as a tooth gift in ancient times. A tooth gift was a real custom, a gift given to a child when the first tooth cuts through. The gods, at some point in the deep past, gave an entire realm to Freyr before he had grown his first tooth. Why Freyr? The sources do not explain. Why a Vanir god rules the realm of the elves? What connection was so obvious to those who first told these stories that it needed no explanation that knowledge did not survive?" The prose Edda adds 2 sentences. "Alfheim is where the light elves dwell. They are fairer to look upon than the sun. The dark elves dwell down in the earth, and they are unlike the light elves in appearance, but far more unlike in nature. The dark elves are blacker than pitch." That is the complete description of Alfheim in all surviving Old Norse literature. The elves themselves. But the elves, the Alfar, appear throughout the sources in ways that reveal far more than any description of their homeland. The first thing the sources establish is status. In Lokasenna, the poem where Loki crashes a feast and insults every god in turn, the gathering he crashes is described this way: "Many of the gods were there, and many of the elves. They are listed as co-hosts of the same event. When Loki is confronted, he is told that none of the Aesir or elves present has a good word for him. Later, Loki himself calls Bragi the most cowardly of all the Aesir and elves. They are not servants. They are not lesser beings. They are present where the gods are present, named alongside them, counted among them." In Skirnismal, the poem about Freyr's courtship of the giantess Gerd, she asks his messenger a direct question: "Are you of the elves, or of the sons of the Aesir, or of the wise Vanir?" 3 categories, named separately, equal in weight. Elves are a distinct kind of being, not gods, not giants, not Vanir, but standing among them. How Elves Speak. There is a poem in the Poetic Edda that does something unusual. A dwarf named Alvis Allwise comes to claim Thor's daughter in marriage. Thor, to delay him until the sun rises and turns him to stone, asks him to name things in the language of every race of beings. What the sky is called among men, among gods, among giants, among elves, among dwarves. The answers the poem preserves for the elves are unlike the others. Men call the sky simply that sky. The gods call it the height. Giants call it the upworld. Dwarves call it the dripping hall. Elves call it the fair roof. The moon, which men call the moon and gods call flame, elves call the teller of time. The sun, which men call the sun, elves call the fair wheel. The clouds, which men call clouds, elves call weather might. Wind is day soother. Calm is day soother. Fire is flame. Every name the elves give is gentle, luminous, oriented toward beauty and the movement of light. They name the sky by how it looks. They name the moon by what it counts. They name the sun by the shape it makes. Where the giants name things by raw force and the dwarves by darkness and dripping stone, the elves name everything as if they are standing in open air, watching the light move. The only elf in the poetic Edda. There is one figure in all of Eddic poetry who is explicitly called an elf. His name is Völund. The poetic Edda calls him the Prince of the Elves, a master smith. In the poem that bears his name, Völund Vida, preserved in the Codex Regius, he and his two brothers find 3 swan maidens by a lake and take them as wives. They live together for 7 years. Then, as the poem says, the women grew restless for their nature, and one morning they were gone. Völund stayed. He waited. He forged rings with gems in them and hung them on a rope, waiting for his wife to return. While he waited, a king named Nithud came. He took the rings. He took Völund captive. He had the tendons in Völund's feet severed so he could not run, and put him on an island to forge treasures. What Völund did next is not the behavior of a being of pure light and beauty. He killed the king's sons when they came to his island in secret and turned their skulls into goblets set with silver. He violated the king's daughter, and then he made wings. The poem says he flew laughing into the sky, and the king could not catch him. The only elf the sources name individually is a genius, a prisoner, and a figure of terrible revenge. The poem never resolves whether what he did was justice or atrocity. It simply ends with him gone, and the king left with what remains. This is not the elf of later folklore. This is something older and stranger. The sacrifice. The elves were not only figures in myth, they were recipients of actual worship. In the autumn, when the harvest ended, Norse households performed a ritual called the Alfheim, the sacrifice to the elves. A Christian skald named Sigvat describes traveling through Sweden in 1018 on a mission for King Olaf of Norway. He came to a farm and asked for shelter. The housewife stood in the doorway and turned him away. She said she feared the wrath of Odin if she admitted a Christian man. She was holding an Alfheim, and no strangers could enter. He was turned away from multiple farms that night. At each one, the same reason. What exactly was performed inside those homes that night, the sources do not say. The Alfheim was private. It was a household rite, not a temple ceremony. Each family conducted it in their own way. The most detailed account comes from a saga where a man named Thorvard is gravely wounded. A woman instructs his people to go to a burial mound in the hills, slaughter a bull, rub the blood around the mound, and cook the meat inside it as a feast for the elves who dwell there. In return, Thorvard would be healed. The elves in this account live in a burial mound, not in a shining realm above the world, in the earth where the dead are. This is the oldest and most persistent understanding of the Norse elves, not distant beings of light, but ancestral spirits, tied to the land, tied to the dead buried beneath it, connected to the fertility of the soil and the health of the living who work it. Light, dark, and the question, Snorri left open. Snorri Sturluson divided the elves into 2 kinds. The light elves of Alfheim, fairer than the sun. The dark elves underground, blacker than pitch. This distinction appears only in Snorri. The older poems do not use these categories. They speak of the Alfar as a single group, moving between worlds, present at feasts, associated with burial mounds and healing and the sun and the turning of time. Whether Snorri was recording something genuine, a real distinction that the older sources happened not to preserve, or whether he was imposing a structure on something older and more ambiguous, is a question that remains open. What the older sources show is a kind of being that does not fit neatly into any category. Not gods, but ranked beside them. Not human, but connected to human fate and health and land. Not entirely of the light, given Völund, and not entirely underground, given their presence at Aegir's feast. The sun is called the elf wheel. Sacrifices are made at burial mounds. Alfheim is given to a fertility god as the first gift of his life, and no one explains why. The elves inhabit the oldest edge of what the Norse sources can tell us, and they stand there still, neither fully illuminated nor fully explained.